You are not wanted here. Nobody wants to see a broke and poor woman here. Get out now.
Get out. Get out now. You are not worthy to be here. You are not worthy to be here.
The champagne flute shattered against the marble floor, and every head in the grand ballroom turned toward the sound. Crystal fragments scattered across the polished surface like diamonds, reflecting the light from the massive chandeliers overhead. But nobody was looking at the broken glass. Every phone in the room was already raised, cameras pointed at the scene unfolding near the entrance of the Metropolitan Gala. A young woman in a custom Valentino gown stood with her arm extended, finger pointed like a weapon at another woman who stood quietly by the coat check area. The accused woman wore a simple black dress, elegant but understated, no jewelry except small pearl earrings, her natural hair pulled back in a neat bun. She held a small clutch purse and stood perfectly still, her face composed, her dark eyes steady as the room erupted around her. The woman in Valentino, blonde highlights perfectly placed, skin bronzed to perfection, dripping in diamonds that probably cost more than most people's houses, was practically vibrating with rage. Her voice carried across the ballroom, sharp and cutting, designed to humiliate. I don't know how you got in here, but this is a private event. Do you understand what that means? The security guards were already moving towards them, summoned by her frantic gestures, and the crowd pressed closer, forming a circle of spectators hungry for drama. The quiet woman said nothing. She didn't defend herself, didn't explain, didn't even change her expression. That silence seemed to enrage the accuser even more. If you're watching this story, you already know this is going to end badly for someone. Stick around, because the twist will absolutely shock you. Make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell, because stories like this don't come around every day and you won't want to miss what happens next. The daughter of billionaire real estate mogul Richard Wellington had never been told no in her entire 26 years of life. Victoria Wellington had grown up in penthouses and private jets, attended schools where her last name opened every door before she even had to knock. She was beautiful, she was rich, and she was used to being the center of attention at events exactly like this one. The annual Metropolitan Charity Gala was her family's event. Her father's foundation hosted it, her mother chaired the planning committee, and Victoria herself sat on the junior board. She knew every person who belonged in this room, or at least she thought she did. So when she'd spotted an unfamiliar black woman standing alone near the entrance, dressed simply, not mingling, not wearing any of the elaborate gowns or statement jewelry that marked the other attendees, Victoria had made an assumption. It was the kind of assumption that people like her made without even thinking about it. The kind rooted so deep, it felt like instinct. The woman didn't belong. She must have snuck in somehow. Maybe she worked for the catering company. Maybe she was someone's assistant who'd gotten too comfortable. Maybe she was just some random person who'd walked in off the street. Whatever the case, Victoria decided she needed to be removed, and she was going to make sure everyone saw her do it. Security, security. Victoria's voice climbed higher, more insistent, as two large men in black suits approached. The crowd murmured, phones still recording, capturing every second. Some people looked uncomfortable, shifting their weight from foot to foot, but nobody intervened. Nobody said, wait, or maybe we should check. Or do you know who she is? They just watched and recorded, complicit in their silence. The quiet woman still hadn't moved. She stood with perfect posture, hands folded in front of her, watching Victoria with an expression that could have been anything: amusement, pity, exhaustion, or nothing at all. Her calm seemed to unsettle some of the onlookers. but it only fueled Victoria's performance. She obviously doesn't belong here, Victoria announced to the crowd, playing to the cameras now, making sure her best angle was captured. This is a $10,000 a plate event for the city's most influential philanthropists and business leaders. I don't know if she followed someone in or if she bribed someone at the door, but she needs to leave now. One of the security guards cleared his throat, looking uncertain. "Ma'am, do you have your invitation?" he asked the quiet woman, his tone apologetic but firm. Before she could respond, Victoria cut in again. "Of course, she doesn't have an invitation. Look at her. Does she look like she belongs at an event like this?" The words hung in the air, ugly and unmistakable. A few people gasped. Someone in the crowd whispered, "Oh my God." But still, nobody stopped it. The woman in the simple black dress finally spoke, her voice low and measured, with a kind of authority that didn't need volume. "I do have an invitation," she said quietly, "but I don't think I need to show it to you." Victoria's perfectly made-up face flushed red with anger and embarrassment. How dare this woman, this nobody, talk back to her at her family's event? In front of all these people and all these cameras, she took a step closer, close enough that the woman could probably smell her expensive perfume, close enough to be threatening. "You don't get to decide that," Victoria hissed, her voice dropping to something more venomous, more personal. "I don't know who you think you are, but you're nothing. You're nobody. And you're about to be escorted out of here in front of everyone. And it's going to be all over social media by morning. So if you have any dignity left, you leave on your own before I have you dragged out." The ballroom had gone almost completely silent now. Even the string quartet in the corner had stopped playing. Hundreds of eyes watched the confrontation. Hundreds of phones recorded every word, every facial expression, every horrible second. The quiet woman looked at Victoria for a long moment, and something flickered in her eyes, not anger, not fear, but something else. Something that should have warned Victoria to stop, should have made her reconsider, should have sent alarm bells ringing through her champagne-soaked brain. But Victoria Wellington had never learned to read warning signs because she'd never faced real consequences in her entire privileged life. The woman nodded slowly, almost to herself, then stepped back slightly. "All right," she said softly. "We'll see." Those two words, Hathcock will see, favored Victoria, but she was too drunk on her own power, too high on the attention, too convinced of her own invincibility to hear the promise in them. Just then, the lights in the ballroom dimmed slightly, and a voice came over the sound system, the event coordinator about to begin the formal program. "Ladies and gentlemen, if you could please take your seats. We're about to begin this evening's presentations. First, we have a very special announcement regarding new leadership at Wellington Industries and the Wellington Foundation." Victoria smiled triumphantly, smoothing down her gown as she prepared to walk to her reserved table at the front of the room. She glanced back at the woman one more time, expecting to see her being led away by security. Instead, the woman was still standing there, still calm, still watching, and she was smiling now too. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was the smile of someone who knew something you didn't, someone who held all the cards while you thought you were winning. The coordinator's voice continued, "We are deeply honored to have with us tonight the new Chief Executive Officer of Wellington Industries, who recently completed the acquisition of a controlling 65% stake in the company, making her not only our CEO, but also our majority shareholder. She's choosing to make her first public appearance here tonight at this gala to demonstrate her commitment to the philanthropic mission of the Wellington Foundation. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Dr. Simone Carter. The spotlight that had been following Victoria suddenly swung across the room. It landed on the quiet woman in the simple black dress. The woman Victoria had just humiliated in front of hundreds of people and countless recording phones. The woman Victoria had called nothing and nobody. The woman who now owned her family's company. The room erupted, but not with applause, with gas, with shocked murmurs, with the sudden understanding of what they'd all just witnessed. And Victoria Wellington felt the floor drop out from underneath her perfectly pedicured feet. What happens when the person you humiliate turns out to own everything you thought was yours? Stick around, because this is just the beginning, and the fallout is going to be absolutely devastating. Don't forget to like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear the story. The applause that followed the announcement was hesitant, confused, punctuated by whispers that rippled through the ballroom like wildfire. Dr. Simone Carter stepped forward into the spotlight, her simple black dress suddenly looking less out of place and more intentionally understated, the choice of someone who didn't need designer labels to command a room. She walked with measured steps toward the stage, her heels clicking against the marble floor, each sound echoing in the stunned silence that had fallen over the Metropolitan Gala Hall. Victoria Wellington stood frozen exactly where she'd been standing when she'd called security, her arm still partially extended, her face drained of color beneath her expensive bronzer. The phones that had been recording her moment of triumph were still recording, but now they were capturing something entirely different. The exact moment a billionaire's daughter realized she'd just destroyed herself in front of everyone who mattered. Simone didn't look at Victoria as she passed. She didn't need to. The cut of her dismissal was sharper than any glance could have been. She mounted the stage stairs with grace, accepting the microphone from the coordinator, whose hands were shaking slightly. Whether from excitement or second-hand embarrassment, nobody could tell. The murmuring in the crowd grew louder. Did she just pow? Oh my God. That was Hamin. Is that really Porturia just accused the new CEO of Tammy's getting fired? Hazel. This is an insane hassle. The fragments of confession layered over shock and anticipation that filled the massive space. You think the gala confrontation was bad? Wait until you see what happens when power shifts hands and consequences come knocking. Keep watching, because this chapter is going to show you exactly what happens when privilege meets reality, and trust me, you're going to want to see every single second of this fall from. Simone stood at the podium, the microphone in her hand, and looked out over the sea of faces, some curious, some embarrassed, many gleeful at the drama they just witnessed. She let the silence stretch for a moment, let the tension build until people started shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Then she smiled, and it was warm and genuine, the smile of someone completely at ease with herself and her power. Good evening, she began, her voice clear and strong, carrying to every corner of the ballroom, without needing to shout. I apologize for the dramatic entrance, though I have to say, it wasn't entirely by design. A nervous laugh rippled through the crowd. My name is Dr. Simone Carter, and as of 3 weeks ago, I became the majority shareholder and CEO of Wellington Industries. For those of you wondering how a woman you've never seen at one of these events before could possibly have acquired controlling interest in one of the city's most prominent real estate and investment firms, let me give you a brief introduction. She paused, glancing down at the podium, then back up at the audience. I graduated from Howard University with a degree in economics, went on to Harvard Business School, and spent the last 15 years building one of the most successful private equity firms in the country, Gala Capital Management. We specialize in identifying undervalued assets and transforming them into profitable, sustainable enterprises. Wellington Industries came to our attention 6 months ago when it became clear that despite its prominent name and impressive portfolio, it was being severely mismanaged. The room had gone completely silent now. Every eye was on Simone, and every ear was listening to each carefully chosen word. She wasn't rubbing it in knots yet, but the implication was clear. The Wellington family, for all their wealth and status, had been running their company into the ground. The board of directors approached Gala Capital Management with a proposal. Simone continued, her tone remaining professional, almost conversational. They recognized that fresh leadership and a significant capital injection were necessary to save the company from a slow decline into irrelevance. After extensive due diligence, I agreed to acquire a controlling stake and assume the role of CEO. The transaction was finalized 2 weeks ago, and tonight was meant to be my first public appearance in this new role, a chance to meet the philanthropic community that the Wellington Foundation has served for so many years, and to assure you all that our commitment to charitable giving and community investment will not only continue, but expand under new leadership. She paused again, and this time her smile had a sharper edge to it. Though I have to admit, the welcome I received tonight was somewhat different from what I'd anticipated. A few people in the crowd laughed, real laughs, nervous ones. Someone near the back started to applaud, and others joined in, building to genuine applause that filled the room. Simone accepted it with a gracious nod, but her eyes had found Victoria in the crowd. Victoria, who was still standing in the same spot, who looked like she might be sick, who was surrounded by people with their phones out, recording her humiliation just as thoroughly as they'd recorded her attempt to humiliate someone. Richard Wellington sat at the front table, his face ashen, his knuckles white, where they gripped the edge of the tablecloth. Next to him, his wife, Catherine, had her eyes closed, one perfectly manicured hand pressed to her forehead, as if trying to ward off a headache or horizon. Their daughter had just publicly attacked and attempted to have removed the woman who now controlled their family's company, their family's legacy, their family's future. And she'd done it in front of hundreds of witnesses and countless cameras at an event bearing their family's name. The legal implications alone were staggering. Financial discrimination lawsuits, hostile environment, public defamation. But the social implications were even worse. In their world, reputation was everything. Connections were everything. And Victoria had just burned those connections to ash in less than 5 minutes. Simone continued her speech, outlining her vision for Wellington Industries, discussing the philanthropic initiatives she planned to expand, mentioning specific programs that would benefit underserved communities in the city. She was brilliant and articulate, and with every word, she made it clearer just how qualified she was for this role, and by extension, how unjustified Victoria's treatment of her had been. When Simone finally finished her remarks to thunderous applause, she handed the microphone back to the coordinator and stepped down from the stage. The crowd parted for her as she walked, people nodding respectfully, some reaching out to shake her hand or introduce themselves. She handled each interaction with grace and warmth, the consummate professional. She still didn't look at, but Richard Wellington was already on his feet, his face red now, instead of pale, moving through the crowd toward his daughter with the kind of purposeful stride that made people step out of his way. Victoria saw him coming and seemed to shrink, all her earlier bravado evaporating like champagne bubble. She opened her mouth to speak, to explain, to defend herself, to make excuses, but her father held up one hand, silencing her before she could begin. "Not here," he said quietly, his voice tight with barely controlled rage. "We're leaving." Now, he grabbed her arm, not gently, and then began steering her toward the exit. Catherine Wellington followed, her expression carefully blank. Years of social training, allowing her to maintain composure even as her world crumbled around her. As they passed other tables, Victoria could hear the whispers, could see the looks, some pitying, most gleeful, all judgmental. The same people who'd laughed and recorded when she was attacking Simone were now whispering about her, recording her humiliation, spreading the story even as it was still unfolding. By the time they reached the exit, Victoria's eyes were filled with tears, her mascara starting to run, her perfect makeup cracking. The photographer from one of the society blogs caught the moment, the billionaire's daughter being dragged out of her own family's gala in disgrace, crying, while the woman she tried to humiliate stood triumphant in the ballroom behind her. The flash went off, capturing the image that would be on every social media platform by midnight. And somewhere in the ballroom, Simone Carter accepted a glass of champagne from a passing waiter, took a small sip, and smiled. What happens when a billionaire's daughter gets dragged out of her own gala, while the woman she humiliated takes her place? The consequences are about to get so much worse, and you won't believe what happens next. Make sure you are subscribed, because chapter 3 is going to blow your mind. Victoria Wellington woke up at 6:30 the next morning to the sound of her phone vibrating so violently it was bouncing across her nightstand. She reached for it with one hand, her head pounding from too much champagne and too many tears, her eyes still swollen from crying herself to sleep at 3 a.m. The screen was filled with notifications, hundreds of them, maybe thousands, still coming in so fast, the numbers were just blurring together. Text messages from friends, former friends, acquaintances, people she hadn't spoken to in years. Instagram notifications, Twitter mentions, TikTok tags, email alerts from every gossip blog and society page in the city. Her hands were shaking as she unlocked the phone, and what she saw made her stomach drop so hard she thought she might actually be sick. The video was everywhere. Not just one video, dozens of them, hundreds of them, all from different angles, all showing the same horrific scene. Victoria Wellington, daughter of billionaire Richard Wellington, pointing and screaming at a black woman in a simple dress, calling security, accusing her of sneaking into the gala, saying those horrible words that now echoed back from every platform. Does she look like she belongs at an event like this? And then the reveal. The spotlight swinging away from Victoria and landing on Dr. Simone Carter. The announcement that she was the new CEO and majority shareholder. Victoria's face going pale, the shocked gasp from the crowd, and then, worst of all, the footage of her father dragging her out while she cried, mascara running down her face, looking like a spoiled child being punished for a tantrum. If you think seeing yourself humiliated online is bad, wait until you see what happens when corporations start cutting ties and your family starts cutting you off. This chapter is about to show you what real consequences look like, so stay with me because this is where everything falls apart. The hashtags were already trending. Hashtag Wellington Gala, hashtag billionaire daughter, hashtag billionaire. The comments were brutal, thousands of them, each one another knife in her chest. This is what privilege looks like. She really thought she could get away with that. The way she just assumed that woman didn't belong. Disgusting. Dr. Carter is a literal CEO, and this girl tried to have her removed. I'm screaming. The second-hand embarrassment is killing me. Rich people really think they own everything and everyone. I hope she loses everything. This is the most satisfying karma I have ever seen. Victoria scrolled through them with trembling fingers, each comment making her feel smaller, more exposed, more ashamed. But it wasn't just random people online. Major news outlets had picked up the story. Billionaire's daughter humiliates new CEO at charity gala. Victoria Wellington's racist outburst caught on camera. Wellington family in crisis after daughter's public meltdown. Dr. Simone Carter faces discrimination at event hosted by company she now owns. The business press was having a field day with it, analyzing the optics, the power dynamics, the potential legal implications. CNN had already aired a segment. The Wall Street Journal had published an article. Even international outlets were picking it up. She was being humiliated on a global scale, and it had only been 12 hours since the gala ended. By the time she walked into the executive seat on the 45th floor of Wellington Tower, her hands were shaking again, and she felt like she might throw up. Her father's assistant, Patricia, who'd known Victoria since she was a child, looked at her with something that might have been pity and gestured toward the office door. "He's waiting for you," Patricia said quietly, and Victoria, "Good luck." The pity in her voice made everything worse. Victoria opened the door and stepped into her father's office, all dark wood and floor-to-ceiling windows, overlooking the city, the space where Richard Wellington had built an empire and now watched it threatened by his own daughter's actions. He was standing at the windows with his back to her, hands clasped behind him, shoulders rigid with tension. "Sit down," he said, without turning around. Victoria sat in one of the leather chairs facing his desk, feeling like a child called to the principal's office. Except the consequences here would be so much worse than detention. Her father turned slowly, and the expression on his face made her want to cry again. It wasn't just anger, it was disappointment, disgust, and something that looked almost like grief. "Do you have any idea," he began, his voice dangerously quiet, "what you've done?" "Dad, I has done." He cut her off sharply. "You will sit there and you will listen, and then you will face the consequences of your actions like an adult, if that's even possible for you." He walked to his desk, picked up a tablet, and turned it toward her. It was showing one of the videos, the one where she'd said, "Does she look like she belongs at an event like this?" He let it play through, forcing her to watch herself, to hear her own voice dripping with contempt and prejudice. "This video," he said, "has been viewed 17 million times in the last 12 hours. 17 million people have watched my daughter expose herself as exactly the kind of entitled, prejudiced, ignorant person I raised her not to be." His voice cracked slightly on the last few words, and Victoria realized with a jolt that he wasn't just angry. He continued, "It's not just our new CEO. She is one of the most brilliant business minds in the country. She has a doctorate in economics from Harvard. She built a billion-dollar private equity firm from nothing. She saw potential in our company when we were failing, and she invested her own money, her own expertise, her own reputation to save it. And you Arcel," he threw the tablet onto the desk with enough force that Victoria flinched, treated her like she was garbage. Like she was nothing. Like she had no right to exist in the same space as you. "I didn't know," Victoria tried again. You didn't know because you didn't ask. Richard roared, his composure finally cracking. You saw a black woman who wasn't wearing diamonds, and you assumed she didn't belong. You didn't ask if she had an invitation. You didn't ask who she was. You didn't even give her the basic respect of treating her like a human being. You just decided, in your infinite wisdom and vast ignorance, that she must be some kind of intruder. The truth of his words hit her like a physical blow. He was right. She hadn't asked. She just assumed. And that assumption, that automatic judgment based on nothing but appearance and prejudice she hadn't even known she carried, had destroyed everything. As of this morning, her father continued, his voice dropping back to that dangerous quiet, you are being removed from the junior board of the Wellington Foundation. Your trust fund has been frozen pending a full review of your conduct and fitness to manage family assets. And every single brand partnership you had, the fashion collaborations, the influencer deals, the endorsements, they are all being terminated. The emails started coming in at midnight. They don't want to be associated with you. Nobody does. Victoria felt the floor drop out from under her for the second time in 12 hours. Everything she had, everything she was, gone just like that. Her father wasn't finished. Dr. Carter could sue you specifically for insurance, for defamation, for creating a hostile environment. Her lawyers contacted me at 5 a.m. this morning. Do you know what she said? Victoria shook her head moodily. She said she doesn't want your money or your apology. She just wants you to understand that actions have consequences and that the world doesn't revolve around people like you anymore. He picked up his phone and glanced at the screen. I have a meeting with Dr. Carter in 20 minutes to discuss how we're going to handle the fallout from this disaster you've created. You are not invited. You are not welcome. And until further notice, you are not to set foot in this building. Contact anyone associated with Wellington Industries or speak publicly about this incident in any way. Do you understand? Victoria nodded, tears streaming down her face now, all her careful makeup ruined again. But this time, her father didn't soften. He didn't comfort her. He just looked at her like she was a stranger, like she was someone who disappointed him beyond measure, and pointed to the door. Get out of my office, he said, and figure out how to become someone better than who you were last night. Because the person you were last night has no place in this family or this company. Think losing your trust fund and your brand deals is the end? You have no idea how deep these consequences are about to go. And the next chapter is going to show you exactly how one night of prejudice can burn your entire life to the ground. Hit that like button and drop a comment about what you think happens next, because this story is far from over. 3 weeks after the gala, Victoria Wellington sat alone in her apartment, not the penthouse her father had bought her in Tribeca, but a cramped studio in Brooklyn that she could barely afford with the emergency credit card that was all she had left. The space was less than 600 square feet, with a kitchen that was just a hot plate and a mini fridge, a bathroom so small she could barely turn around in the shower, and a single window that looked out onto a brick wall. It was the kind of place she would have laughed at a month ago, the kind of place she never imagined she'd actually have to live in. But here she was, sitting on a mattress on the floor because she couldn't afford a bed frame, eating instant ramen because it was all her budget allowed, watching her entire life continue to implode in real time on her phone screen. The video hadn't stopped spreading. If anything, it had gotten worse. News outlets kept doing follow-up stories. Where is Victoria Wellington now? The fall of the billionaire's daughter. Dr. Simone Carter speaks out about discrimination in elite space. Think tanks were using the incident as a case study in implicit bias and systemic racism. Universities were showing the video in sociology classes. It had become bigger than just one embarrassing moment. It had become a cultural touchstone, a symbol of everything wrong with wealth and privilege, and the assumptions people make based on race and class. And Victoria was at the center of it, unable to escape, unable to make it stop, unable to do anything but watch as the consequences kept piling up. You think hitting rock bottom means the pain stops? Stay with me, because this chapter is going to show you that sometimes the fall keeps going, and sometimes the people you thought would catch you are the ones who pushed you. Keep watching, because what happens next will leave you speechless. The brand deals hadn't just been terminated. They'd been publicly terminated, with statements released to the press. Dior had issued a statement saying they do not align with individuals who demonstrate discriminatory behavior. Cartier had removed all photos of her from their social media and website. The fashion magazine that had featured her in their New York's Most Influential Young Women issue had published an editorial apology for including her. Her modeling agency had dropped her. Her PR firm had dropped her. Even her personal trainer and her hairstylist had quietly stopped returning her calls, not wanting to be associated with someone so publicly toxic. Her so-called friends had vanished even faster. The group chat that used to blow up her phone with party invitations and gossip had gone silent. Nobody was calling to check on her. Nobody was offering support. Nobody wanted anything to do with her. Some had blocked her outright. Others just pretended she didn't exist. She'd seen photos on Instagram of her former best friend at brunch with the rest of their social circle. The same people who'd been at the gala, who'd watched it all happen. And the caption talked about surrounding yourself with good people and knowing your worth. The message was clear. Victoria wasn't good people anymore, and she had no worth. She'd tried to apologize in those first desperate days after the gala. She drafted statements, hired a crisis management consultant with the last of her accessible money, tried to do interviews to explain herself, but every apology came out sounding hollow, defensive, like she was sorry she got caught rather than sorry for what she'd done. And the public wasn't interested in her apologies anyway. They wanted her to suffer, and suffer she did. The Wellington family had completely cut her off. Her mother wouldn't take her calls. Her father had made it clear through his lawyers that she was financially independent now, financially abandoned. The frozen trust fund wasn't going to be unfrozen, not for years, maybe not ever. She had access to nothing, owned nothing except what she'd been able to grab from the penthouse before the locks were changed. Her credit cards had been cancelled. Her name had been removed from the country club membership, the spa membership, every exclusive list she'd ever been on. She was a Wellington in name only, and even that name had become a curse rather than a blessing. The apartment in Brooklyn was all she could afford because nobody would rent to her in Manhattan. Her name had become too recognizable, too problematic. Landlords didn't want the controversy. She'd had to use a fake name just to get this place, paying 6 months in advance with the cash she'd had in a personal safe. She had applied for jobs, dozens of them, but nobody would hire her. Her resume looked impressive on paper, grade from Columbia, internships at prestigious firms, board positions. So the moment they Googled her name, the interviews ended. One hiring manager had been honest enough to tell her the truth. "We can't have someone with your reputation representing our company. I'm sorry." She wasn't sorry enough to give Victoria the job. Nobody was sorry enough for that. Victoria had been forced to create new social media accounts under different names just to exist online, because her real accounts had become cesspools of harassment. Death threats, doxing attempts, people digging up every mistake she'd ever made and publicizing it. Someone had found photos from her college days at a party where people were wearing culturally appropriative costumes. She hadn't even been in the photos, just tagged in them, but it didn't matter. Everything was fuel for the fire now. The isolation was suffocating. Victoria had never been alone before, not really. She'd always been surrounded by people, family, friends, assistants, staff, hangers-on, who wanted access to her money and connections. Even when she'd been physically alone, she'd been connected, her phone always buzzing with messages and invitations and opportunities. Now the silence was deafening. Days would go by where she didn't speak to another human being. She'd go to the bodega on the corner to buy food, and the owner would recognize her from the videos and give her a look of pure disgust. She'd ride the subway, something she'd never done in her life before, and people would stare, whisper, pull out their phones to take pictures of the disgraced heiress, riding the L train like a common person. She was a spectacle, a cautionary tale, a punchline to jokes she'd hear people making as she walked by. The worst part was the endless empty hours where she had nothing to do but think about what she'd done and who she'd been. She'd never had to examine herself before, never had to question her assumptions or confront her prejudices. She'd grown up in a bubble of wealth and whiteness where everyone looked like her, thought like her, confirmed her worldview at every turn. She'd never had to consider that maybe the way she saw the world was wrong, that maybe her comfort and confidence came at someone else's expense, that maybe the doors that opened so easily for her were locked tight for people who looked like Dr. Simone Carter. The realization was crushing, but it came too late. Understanding her mistakes now didn't undo them. Being sorry now didn't erase the hurt she'd caused or the damage she'd done. And most importantly, it didn't stop the consequences that kept coming. Her phone buzzed, a rare occurrence these days, and planned Victoria grabbed it with pathetic eagerness, hoping for anything, any human connection at all. It was an email from her father's lawyer. The subject line read, "Wellington v. Wellington formal notice." Her hand started shaking as she opened it. The email was brief and devastating. The Wellington family was formally severing all legal and financial ties with her. The trust fund was being permanently dissolved and redistributed to charity. She was being removed from all family documents, wills, and holdings. Effectively, she was being disowned, written out of the family entirely. And there was more. Dr. Simone Carter had decided to move forward with a civil lawsuit, after all noted for money. The email clarified, but to establish legal precedent for discrimination cases at private events. Any settlement or judgment would be donated to organizations fighting racial injustice. Victoria would be required to participate in the legal proceedings, which would be public, which would keep the story in the news cycle for months or years to come. She would never be allowed to move on, never be allowed to disappear, never be allowed to rebuild. The consequences of that one night at the gala would follow her for the rest of her life. She dropped the phone and buried her face in her hands, the tears coming again, like they did every night, hot and bitter and endless. She had lost everything: her money, her family, her friends, her future, her name, her identity. Everything she'd been was gone, burned to ash by her own actions, and there was no coming back from it. No redemption arc, no forgiveness, no second chances. Just consequences, stretching out before her like a prison sentence with no end date. And somewhere across the city, in the corner office at Wellington Tower, Dr. Simone Carter was building something new from the ashes of the Wellington family's legacy, proving every day that she was exactly where she belonged and always had been. Think this is rock bottom. Think the consequences are finally over. Chapter 5 is going to show you that when you burn bridges with the wrong person, the smoke follows you forever. Make sure you're still subscribed and hit that notification bell, because the ending of the story is going to stay with you long after the video ends. 6 months had passed since the gala, and the Metropolitan Charity Hall was hosting another event. This one bigger, more prestigious, celebrating the relaunch of the Wellington Foundation under new leadership. The ballroom was packed with the same faces that had been there that fateful night, plus new ones, powerful ones, people who wanted to align themselves with Dr. Simone Carter's vision and success. The foundation had tripled its charitable contributions under her direction, launched innovative programs supporting minority entrepreneurs and underserved communities, and become a model for how corporate philanthropy could create real lasting change. Tonight was meant to celebrate those achievements and announce the foundation's new name, the Carter Wellington Initiative for Economic Justice. Simone stood on the same stage where she'd given her first speech as CEO, but now she wore a custom gown in deep emerald green. Her natural hair styled in elegant locks, adorned with gold accessories, looking every inch the powerhouse she'd always been. The applause when she took the microphone was thunderous and genuine, not confused or hesitant like it had been 6 months ago. These people knew who she was now. They respected her. They wanted to be associated with her success. She smiled warmly at the crowd, her confidence radiating through the room, and began to speak about the foundation's accomplishments, about the lives changed and communities uplifted, about the future they were building together. She didn't mention Victoria Wellington. She didn't need to. The absence was louder than any words could have been. This is it, the final chapter where you'll see exactly how this story ends. If you've made it this far, you know this isn't about redemption. It's about consequences that last forever. Stay until the very end, because what you're about to witness will change how you think about privilege, accountability, and the price of prejudice. Victoria watched a live stream from her tiny apartment in Brooklyn, sitting on the same mattress on the floor, eating the same instant ramen, living the same diminished life she'd been living for a year. She watched her father sitting at the front table, applauding Dr. Carter's speech with genuine admiration and respect. She watched her mother next to him, smiling, engaged, looking happier than Victoria had seen her look in years. She watched the foundation that had borne her family's name get transformed into something that explicitly excluded that name, replaced it with the name of the woman Victoria had tried to humiliate. The symbolism wasn't subtle. It wasn't meant to. The Wellington legacy was being erased, rewritten, claimed by someone more deserving, and her family was letting it happen. No, helping it happen. Because they'd rather align themselves with Simone Carter's brilliance than their own daughter's disgrace. The lawsuit had been settled 2 months ago. Victoria had been required to make a public statement acknowledging her discriminatory behavior and the harm it had caused. required to participate in extensive training on implicit bias and systemic racism, required to perform community service at organizations serving communities of color. The settlement amounts, Somalik, just $1, had been donated to the NAAC Legal Defense Fund, along with a substantial contribution from Dr. Carter herself. But the real punishment wasn't the money or the community service or even the public humiliation of the settlement. It was the permanence of it all, the way it had become part of the permanent record of her life, searchable and accessible forever. Victoria had tried to move forward. She'd completed the required training, done the community service hours at a youth center in the Bronx, where the kids had recognized her from the videos and looked at her with mixture of curiosity and contempt. She'd worked minimum wage jobs where she could find them, retail positions where she had to wear a name tag with a fake name, food service jobs where she worked in the back to avoid customers who might recognize her. She'd applied to graduate programs thinking education might be a path to redemption, but her applications were rejected, her name too toxic even for institutions that preached second chances and transformation. She'd tried to volunteer at non-profits, thinking maybe if she dedicated herself to service, she could rebuild some kind of life, but organizations didn't want her either. One director had told her bluntly, "Your presence would upset our clients and damage our credibility. I'm sorry, but we can't take that risk." Everything she tried to do, everywhere she tried to go, the video followed her. It had been viewed over 50 million times now. It had been featured in documentaries about racism and privilege. It had been analyzed in academic papers and think pieces and viral Twitter threads. Victoria Wellington had become a symbol, a shorthand for entitled racism, a cautionary tale about the consequences of prejudice. She wasn't a person anymore in the public consciousness. She was a meme, a moment, a lesson about what not to do and who not to be. And there was no escaping it, no moving past it, no redemption arc that would satisfy the court of public opinion. She tried apologizing again, months after the incident, posting a carefully worded statement on a new social media account. The response had been immediate and brutal. Too little, too late. She's only sorry she got caught. Performative apology from a racist who lost everything. Nobody cares about your feelings, Victoria. The comments had poured in by the thousands, each one a reminder that forgiveness wasn't coming, that she would carry this weight forever. On the live stream, Dr. Simone Carter was announcing a new scholarship program. Full ride scholarships to Howard University for students from underserved communities interested in business and economics, fully funded by the Carter Wellington Initiative. The crowd erupted in applause. Richard Wellington stood to shake Simone's hand, and the cameras captured the moment, the symbolic passing of legacy from one generation to another, from old money to new merit, from inherited privilege to earned respect. Victoria's father looked proud in a way he'd never looked when he'd looked at her. That hurt worse than everything else combined, seeing him give to Simone Carter the approval and admiration he'd withdrawn from his own daughter, seeing him invest in someone else's success because his own child had proven herself unworthy. The family business was thriving under Simone's leadership. Stock prices were up 40%. New developments were breaking ground in neighborhoods that had been neglected for decades, creating jobs and opportunities. The company had won awards for workplace diversity and community investment. Everything the Wellington family had built over generations was being elevated and transformed by the woman Victoria had tried to have removed from a gala, and the irony was so sharp it drew blood every time Victoria thought about it. Her phone buzzed with a notification, not an email or a message, but a news alert. Dr. Simone Carter named to Forbes' Most Powerful Women list. Victoria clicked on the article and read about Simone's accomplishments, her vision, her impact. There was a quote from her near the end of the article that made Victorians happy about a catch in her throat. I don't believe in tearing people down for their mistakes. I believe in building systems that don't allow those mistakes to cause harm in the first place. My focus isn't on punishing individuals, it's on creating a more just and equitable society where everyone has the opportunity to succeed based on merit, not privilege or prejudice. Even now, even after everything, Simone Carter was taking the high road, refusing to gloat or celebrate Victoria's downfall. Instead, focusing on the positive change she was creating. Victoria closed the live stream and put her phone down, sitting in the silence of her tiny apartment, feeling the weight of 6 months and all the months that would follow. She understood now, in a way she hadn't that night at the gala, what she'd done and who she'd been. She understood the assumptions she'd made, the prejudices she'd carried, the privilege she'd weaponized without even realizing it was a. She understood that Simone Carter had been qualified, accomplished, brilliant, and deserving of respect, and that Victoria had denied her that respect based on nothing but the color of her skin and the simplicity of her dress. She understood that the humiliation she'd attempted to inflict had rebounded onto her 1,000 times over, and that she'd earned every bit of it. But understanding didn't change anything. Being sorry didn't undo the damage. Acknowledging her mistakes didn't erase the consequences. She'd lost everything, and it was never coming back. Not her family, not her money, not her reputation, not her future. The Wellington name would go on without her, elevated by Simone Carter's leadership. The foundation would thrive without her. The world would keep turning, and she would be nothing but a footnote, a cautionary tale, a viral video that people would watch and share and learn from for years to come. Tomorrow, she'd wake up and go to her shift at the coffee shop in Park Slope, where she made $12 an hour and wore someone else's name on her uniform. She'd avoid eye contact with customers and hope nobody recognized her. She'd come home to this apartment that cost most of her paycheck and eat cheap food and live a small, diminished life that bore no resemblance to the one she'd had before. And it would be like that for the foreseeable future, possibly forever, because actions have consequences and some consequences don't have expiration dates. Some bridges, once burned, can never be rebuilt. Some names, once destroyed, can never be restored. Some moments, once captured on video and shared 50 million times, become permanent scars on your existence. Victoria Wellington had learned that lesson in the harshest way possible, and she would keep learning it every single day for the rest of her life. Meanwhile, across the city, Dr. Simone Carter accepted another round of applause, smiled graciously at the crowd, and continued building something meaningful and lasting from the ashes of a family's legacy, proving once again that dignity, competence, and character will always triumph over privilege, prejudice, and entitlement in the end. And that's where this story ends, not with redemption, not with forgiveness, but with the cold, hard truth that some consequences last forever, and some people never recover from their own mistakes. If this story moved you, hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe for more powerful stories about accountability, justice, and the real price of prejudice. Drop a comment and let me know what you think, because stories like this matter, and your voice matters too. Thanks for watching, and remember, character is revealed in how you treat people when you think nobody's watching. And in this digital age, Somebody is always watching.